Outside the European Commission in Brussels, we just had a result from the arbitration process around this Airbus complaint going back some 14 years or so. The arbitrators from the WTO announcing that the US is now entitled to impose sanctions tariffs worth up to $7.5 billion on European products as a consequence of subsidies paid to Airbus during launch of aircraft over specific periods in the past. What needs to happen now is that this ruling needs to be adopted by the Governing Council of the WTO. That's the dispute settlement body. The next meeting for that scheduled the end of October, but the US could call a special meeting before then if they want to move things along quickly. The EU making very clear they don't want the US to impose tariffs on European products if they can help it. And we've got a statement out from the European Commissioner for Trade, Cecilia Malmström, saying applying countermeasures now would be short-sighted and counterproductive. She says, quote, both the EU and the US have been found at fault by the WTO dispute settlement system for continuing to provide certain unlawful subsidies to their aircraft manufacturers. She's referring there to, of course, the fact that in a few months' time, we're expecting a very similar ruling from that same WTO against Boeing. And as a consequence of that, the Europeans hoping that these can move to settlement talks rather than these kind of tit-for-tat tariffs that might be expecting. Both sides, though, have drawn up a list of products they'd like to target. The US now essentially has the next move, guys.
All right, Willem, just to put it into some context, do we know offhand how many times WTO tends to side with the US in a dispute?
It's not even that. It's essentially going back to 2011, a decision was made. They went into arbitration to talk about whether the Europeans, in this instance on Airbus, had complied with earlier rulings, and that arbitration was suspended for many years. Having restarted, they came to the conclusion just last year that this was something where the Europeans had failed to comply, and this arbitration over the last few weeks was much more about getting the specific number. The US had requested $11.2 billion worth of tariffs be available to them. The Europeans said that was much too high. It looks like the arbitrators have to some degree agreed with the Europeans, coming in with $7.5 billion. That's now available to the US. What we heard from Cecilia Malmström last night, interestingly, is because of that Boeing case down the road being a reason they might have to hold off to be WTO compliant with their own retaliatory measures, they may look at some old WTO rulings from the last decade or so where the US was found at fault. The EU was entitled to take countermeasures. They chose not to then, but they might now take them if the US imposes and they're forced to respond.